CBS News coverage of Election Night continues. Brought to you by the Institute of Life Insurance on behalf of the life insurance companies in America and their agents. And by Tarleton, the charcoal filter cigarette with a taste worth fighting for.
This is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News election headquarters. On this election night, November 3rd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson apparently has made history. It seems quite clear now that he has won the presidency in his own right by the largest majority ever run up by any presidential candidate in our history. It may run as high as 64%, according to our poll of precincts across the nation right now, with 31 million votes for Johnson and 19 million for Goldwater, with 70% of the vote tabulated. Johnson and Humphrey have 62% of the vote, and Goldwater and Miller 38%. 61% that Franklin Delano Roosevelt got against Alf Landon in 1936 was the highest previous total. Johnson's electoral vote is almost as wide a margin, too. 474 votes he's won already. He probably has won 5, and that's a total of 479. Goldwater has won 35. He probably will win 12 more in Georgia, and that will make a total of 47. 270 are required to win. The Democratic sweep for Lyndon Johnson that has cut across all economic, geographic, racial lines to give him victories in all groups in the country, is also carrying Democrats to victory in senatorial and gubernatorial races, and in the race for Congress. With 35 Senate seats up this year, the Democrats have won 26 and the Republicans only 3. That's 29 of the races, with 6 yet to be heard from. 26 Democratic seats with 40 holdovers would give them a margin of 66 votes in the 89th Congress, a meeting in January. The Republicans with 25 holdovers would have 28 seats. As we say, there are 6 seats yet to be heard from. In the state house races, there were 25 governorship races this year. The Democrats already have won 17, and the Republicans 4. With 16 holdovers, that means that Democrats will control the capitals of 33 states, the Republicans 13 states. A tremendous margin, a big new margin for the Democrats there. In the Congress of the United States, the Democrats have won 277 seats already, and the Republicans 132. It means that the Democratic margin definitely will be at least 23 seats more than they had in the 88th Congress. 254 they had then, 176 to the Republicans. So it looks as if the Democrats are going to have wide margins in both the houses of Congress as well as in the state capitals, which are very important in a year when many states are going to be reapportioning. By the same token, the Democrats are winning the state legislatures in many states where they had been held by the Republicans, in Indiana, for instance, and in New York State. There are still some close races outstanding, not very many. Our President Johnson swept the entire East. Goldwater got no states in the East. He swept the Middle West, and only Nebraska is outstanding there. It's probably for Johnson. In the West, Johnson has won everything except Alaska, Hawaii, and Arizona. Arizona is one of the races being watched very closely. It's still too close to call in Senator Goldwater's home state. Only in the South did Senator Goldwater win any states at all. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, and Georgia is still a probable and very close in Georgia. Among the close races we are watching is the gubernatorial race in Wisconsin also, where the Democratic governor, John Reynolds, is meeting a very close and tight hard fight with Warren Knowles, his Republican challenger. And there are 5 outstanding Senate races that are really thrilling and going down to the wire. Bob Trout has a story there.
Yes, Walter, of all the stories there are to tell about the Senate and the House tonight, this is one of them. Of the 34 Senate races in the continental United States, 5 do remain too close to call at this time. In California, the Democratic Senator Pierre Salinger is trailing the Republican George Murphy by a handful of votes, as we can see, 35% of the vote counted. Let's just see what the VPA says. Vote profile analysis says 50-50. That means it's too close to call. In Ohio, Republican Robert Taft Jr. is leading the Democratic incumbent Stephen Young, but it still is not very much of a margin. Stephen Young has so far had marvelously good luck in his career. He swept into the Senate 6 years ago when the Republicans backed a right-to-work law that was their undoing in that election. And then this year in the Democratic primary, Senator Young was threatened by astronaut John Glenn, who suffered that bathroom fall and withdrew from the race. Will Senator Young's luck hold? We'll see a bit later on. In Arizona, Paul Fannin, the Republican, is leading Democrat Roy Elson for the seat that Senator Goldwater has vacated to make this presidential race. In Pennsylvania, Republican Senator Hugh Scott leads the Democrat Miss Genevieve Blatt, again by so few votes you can scarcely count them, just a handful. In Nevada, the incumbent Democratic Senator Howard Cannon leads the Republican Paul Laxalt by just a few votes again. 70% of the votes counted. That's the story of those 5 races, Walter.
So it looks like from your vantage point at the finish line, Bob, you're going to be cheering them on for a good while yet before we get final results on those. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment.
Honey?
Mike Wallace, we got Bob Trout's rundown of the senatorial races. Would you give us yours now on the State House, the gubernatorial races?
Well, Walter, finally out on the West Coast, a Republican candidate has unseated a Democratic governor in Washington state. The tabulated vote shows the Republican, 38-year-old Dan Evans, leading the Democratic incumbent Albert Rossellini, and that is just about the way that our VPA analysis of the race indicates it. Evans has won with an estimated 53% of the vote, although President Johnson won out there with about 58% of the vote, so there was a good deal of ticket splitting. Dan Evans, by the way, is by no means a Goldwater man. The way he put it was this: we are not repudiating our national candidates, but we are taking a different direction. That is the first Republican to unseat a Democratic incumbent in a state house anyplace in the United States tonight. Now, we haven't heard anything really of that tight gubernatorial contest in Massachusetts, the chief reason being that because of the we're going to Senator Keating remote, I understand. Senator Kenneth Keating is evidently coming out of his headquarters from New York. I gather he's going to make a statement of concession here to Robert Kennedy. Kenneth Keating waged a tough and a bitter campaign, and the smile on his face, I'm sure, belies the feelings that he is saddled with right now. Nelson Rockefeller on his left, Jacob Javits on his right. It's been a disastrous evening for the Republican Party in all of New York. There's Charles Kuralt, CBS News correspondent at Keating headquarters.
Win in the state of New York as a triumph for Republican moderation. On the other side by Herbert Brownell, his campaign director, apparently ready now to concede that he has lost this very hard-fought Senate contest to the younger brother of the late president.
Thank you very much. I have just dispatched the following telegram to Bob Kennedy. Dear Bob, congratulations on your victory. The people of New York have expressed their judgment, and I stand ready to assist you in every way in assuming your important post. I wish you every success in carrying out your senatorial duties. Signed, Ken Keating. I appreciate more than I can say the wonderful support which all of you hard workers have given to me. Some of you, most of you are Republicans. Many of you are Democrats and independents. I appreciate it more than I'm able to express. I want to also express my gratitude to the hundreds of thousands who voted for me in this election, and also to the more than majority, at least, who voted for me in 1958 and made it possible for me to have these 6 rewarding years in the United States Senate. I hardly know where to start in thanking my friends. I shall spend the next 2 or 3 days at least before I take a little rest. I shall spend in trying to contact and send letters to as many as possible of those who have been so wonderful in this campaign. It was a hard-fought campaign, and I see so many faces in this room of those who have been loyal supporters. I'm very grateful to you. I have at my side here Governor Rockefeller and Senator Javits. And my wonderful campaign director who gave so unstintingly of his time and his efforts and left his busy law practice in order to act in that capacity and really ran a tight ship and did a great job, and I'm extremely grateful to Herb Brownell. And at my right, of course, is my old and dear friend who tramped many of the pavements with me here in the city, Louis Lefkowitz. And John Lamanzo, who spent all of yesterday with me campaigning and has been in the forefront of this fight. And my dear friend, the Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Wilson, who has done a great job. Gene Rositas, my campaign manager who worked with Herb Brownell. And the biggest man in the police force weighs 320 pounds, all muscle, that's been protecting me all the way through. So, Governor, why don't you say a word or two while we're all waiting?
Ken Keating, and fellow Republicans, one of the great senators in the history of New York State has been rolled under, has been rolled under by a national landslide, tied against the Republican Party. But he has waged one of the magnificent campaigns, and he has run 1,500,000 ahead of the ticket. 1,500,000. 1,500,000. Unprecedented, ladies and gentlemen. When this campaign started, Jack Javits said that Ken Keating can overcome 1 million votes and win. He's overcome 1.5 million, but it wasn't enough, ladies and gentlemen, to overcome the landslide. It's a tragedy for New York that Ken Keating is not going back for another 6 years.
Governor Rockefeller thus confirming for that group of Keating supporters what he's been saying all along, that a Senator Barry Goldwater candidacy could be fatal to other parts of the ticket in New York. As a matter of fact, that is just what happened here. In New York, Johnson ran up better than a 2 million vote margin. It's now 3,900,000 against Goldwater's 1,878,000 in New York, whereas Keating ran only 500,000, less than 500,000, behind Robert Kennedy. 3,066,000 for Kennedy, 2,572,000 for Keating. As Governor Rockefeller said, he overcame 1.5 million of that margin of Johnson's, but he couldn't overtake the other 500,000. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. In that close California senatorial race, a third of the vote has been counted now, and George Murphy is slowly pulling away from Senator Pierre Salinger. The vote now 1,250,000, Salinger 1,092,000. VPA says it's too close to call. In Texas, conservative Republican Congressman Bruce Alger in Dallas, seeking his 6th term, has been defeated by Dallas's former mayor Earl Cabell, who is a conservative Democrat. In Indiana, House Republican leader Charles Halleck has won re-election, which was expected. In California, that proposition to defeat, to nullify the fair housing law is apparently winning. It's got about a 2-to-1 margin already, with about 20% of the vote counted out there. In Tennessee, Democrat William Anderson has been elected to the House of Representatives from Tennessee's 6th District. He's going to succeed Democrat Ross Bass, who has been elected to the Senate. The importance of that is that William Anderson is the retired commander of the first atomic submarine, the Nautilus. And now, Eric Severide, maybe you can give us some views of what's been happening this night, this rather historic night, particularly what's been happening to extremism.
Well, you know, there was a theory, Walter, that's been articulated in great detail by at least one political scientist in this country, Dr. Lipset of California, who has maintained that the extremist groups of today are very much like those of the 20s, in fact, way back to the Native American Party, the so-called Know-Nothings of the last century. But it was also his argument that when they become extremely active, it is not because they are within sight of victory or the predominance in this country of their general point of view, but when they are in fact a declining group. Now perhaps they are. I would think that, and if we mean by extremists many of the little hate groups that have flooded the country with so-called literature, I would think one question is this: has this defeat of the man that they have supported, whether he wanted their support or not, Mr. Goldwater, does this mean that their presence in this campaign with so much noise has immunized us against this kind of strong emotional poison, almost one could call it, and given us an idea of what our politics could be like if people like that became really powerful and numerous? Or have their activities rather desensitized us, blunted our nerve ends, and lowered our moral standards in politics so that we've come to expect this kind of thing? I must confess, I don't know what the answer is. I would think that they would be rather quiet from now on. There is something else I think that one might turn to just for a moment. This Johnson sweep, of course, Walter, is going to be the big headline story all over Europe and much of the world tomorrow morning. It is now morning in Europe. Virtually all organs of public opinion in West Europe have hoped that Mr. Johnson would win. They now have their hope. It leaves the President of the United States
I would think, in a most extraordinarily powerful position in terms of our alliance, in terms of all our dealings with the friend and enemy. This is an enormous endorsement, and he comes in at a time when the government of England is in a rather shaky position in terms of its numerical majority and ability to govern, when the Russians have a new leadership, perhaps somewhat unpredictable. The Chinese are now in the atomic age, but nothing upsetting in terms of violent change has happened here. He has said he would go to Europe. He has said he would call a White House conference about peace, for whatever that might accomplish. But certainly with Mr. de Gaulle, President de Gaulle in France, now aging considerably and perhaps losing some influence, the American president really dominates the scene of this alliance. He has not turned his back in the campaign on the general theory of always trying to negotiate with the communists. Mr. Goldwater has taken a very different line. Every opinion poll that I know about has said most people do want the attempts to negotiate to continue. Now, how he will do it, whether by attempt at a summit meeting or something of that kind, none of us yet know. His whole approach domestically on the Great Society, as he has called it since that Michigan speech, is something that will now be unveiled, I presume. He has had the task force working at it. He has been a domestic affairs man most of his political life. Foreign policy has been something rather recent for him. I would think that he will get really active in it when he thinks there's something practical and measurable that he can accomplish in that realm as well as the domestic realm, because he's a practical man who likes to run up a score.
Thank you, Eric. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News election headquarters. It's here that we have been marking this remarkable victory of Lyndon Johnson's on our scoreboard. Now 3/4 of the vote is in, a vote which it is indicated will be a record total for the United States, 71 million, and that ought to go over even the best percentage ever run up before, and that was just in the last presidential election in 1960 of some 64% of the available eligible voters. And Lyndon Johnson has 32,635,000 votes to Goldwater's 20,089,000. About an hour ago, Lyndon Johnson's percentage, which had stood at 60% most of the evening, moved up to 61 and then to 62%. And it's getting very close, remarkably close to the 64% that had been predicted by the polls as the best margin that he could expect. In the electoral vote, it was back around 9 o'clock, 4 hours ago, very early on in the evening, when Lyndon Johnson moved into the lead with enough votes to be declared the presidential winner. Here's William Miller, Goldwater's running mate at Lockport, New York.
It wouldn't be, I don't think...
Congressman Miller has just come out and is speaking now.
I don't think that it would be proper for me to make any statement prior to the time that Senator Goldwater made his. I have just talked to Senator Goldwater. I just hung up the phone 2 or 3 minutes ago. He has indicated to me that he has no intention of making a statement until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That would be Arizona time, so I presume that would mean around noon here. So I indicated to him that I would come out and make this statement, which I am making. And that is that I won't make any statement until he makes his. And since he has decided not to make one until tomorrow morning, then I'm foreclosed myself from making any until that time. And as soon as he makes his statement, then I shall make mine.
Well, Congressman, did Senator Goldwater give you any reason why he is waiting?
Well, he wants to analyze, I think, in depth, not particularly the electoral vote so much as the popular vote, to find out when it's all totaled up as to exactly how much support on a people-to-people basis rather than on an electoral vote basis, the posture and position that he's taken, and let's say the so-called conservative position, how much actual popular support it's received. You can't get that from projections or from 5% of the vote or 10% of the vote or 20% of the vote. You can't really get it until it's pretty well totaled up. And this is what he wants to wait to see so that then he can make his statement in connection with the general popular support, which he believes.
Do you realistically think there's any chance of winning now, Congressman Miller?
I'm not going to make any further statement than I have already.
Congressman, did you get any impression of Senator Goldwater's mood?
It's the electoral vote that does do it.
Yes, I understand that.
Congressman, did you get any impression of Senator Goldwater's mood? Is he bitter?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, do you think
he was cheerful in this conversation?
Yes, very, very.
Something concerning the future of the party? Do you believe?
No. As I say, until the vote is in, and until Senator Goldwater makes his statement, and until I confer with him in connection with his statement, I have no further statement to make.
Do you expect to send any message to Senator Humphrey?
Oh, I certainly will.
Are you going to?
Not until tomorrow morning.
Oh, of course not. I won't do anything until after we make our statement.
Are you going to stay up all night?
I'm not contemplating that.
Are you going to bed now, Mr. Miller?
No.
You're not coming
No.
Well, we will not hear from you again tonight. Is that
that's right.
And
that
is
correct.
Going to bed shortly, or?
Well, I mean, why do I have to reveal these military secrets? But I am, I think, probably.
We'll play some bridge?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you.
Enough playing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're still going. We're still leaving as planned for Washington tomorrow at 1:45.
How's your family taking leave?
Oh, fine, wonderful. Well, they're great.
And how about the supporters, Congressman Miller? Those with you in the lead homes?
Oh, they're fine. We take these things philosophically in Lockport.
Has it turned out the way you thought it was going to?
You mean the way I thought it was going to when?
Any time.
What do you mean?
The vote.
Well, no. I mean, as I say, I'm making no statement in connection with this. The returns at this point.
Are you surprised at the overwhelming Democratic support in New York State?
I'm making no further statement in connection with the returns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Good night to you.
So Congressman Miller discloses that his running mate, Senator Goldwater, is delaying his concession until tomorrow morning. A rather mysterious conversation. It was reported by Congressman Miller. He said the senator was not bitter. He apparently was cheerful, but is taking the highly unusual step of delaying his final comment until tomorrow morning. Now the congressman and his wife are going out to greet again the neighbors and friends from Lockport. Mrs. Miller, how are you?
Just fine.
You going to stay out much later?
Oh, no, I don't think so. We might shake some hands, and then I think we'll turn in.
For the last time tonight.
Yes, little
Girls,
packing.
how are you taking the...
Well, I think, you can't say you're not disappointed, but certainly it was a wonderful experience, and a wonderful honor.
Out in Los Angeles, the Republican candidate for the Senate there, George Murphy, we understand is about to make a statement. Let's go to Los Angeles.
And I'm so pleased that the voters of the state of California, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans alike, have so far shown this confidence that we've got a lead, and I sincerely hope it keeps on this way. And a little later on, when more returns are in, we'll have a statement to make. Hi, Dodie.
What George Murphy is pleased about is that with 46% of the vote counted in California, he's pulling very slowly away from the Democratic incumbent, Senator Pierre Salinger, for that Senate seat. The figure is 1,612,000 to Salinger's 1,424,000. Our VPA says that this race, as certainly the figures would indicate, is far too close to call at this moment. Might be mentioned that Congressman Miller, who you saw a moment ago there at Lockport, Lockport, New York, his home, gave up the Republican National Committee chairmanship and a seat in Congress to make this run for the vice presidency. Although he had announced earlier he intended to resign from Congress anyway and not run, he now intends to return to his law practice in Lockport as soon as that concession does come. We did have an announcement that Goldwater's press secretary expects to make an announcement at any moment out in Phoenix, Arizona. It may simply be to confirm what Miller has already told us, that Senator Goldwater does not expect to make any statement until 10 o'clock Arizona time tomorrow morning, or later this morning, as it turns out. Now let's go to Roger Mudd at our presidential analysis desk. Roger?
Walter, Lyndon Johnson has won in Nebraska. On the basis of vote profile analysis, he is the winner there by 52%. The popular vote shows him in the lead, 144,971 to Goldwater's 122,021. But VPA shows an ultimate victory for the president of 52%, and that would just about take care of the Middle West. An entire sweep by President Johnson of all the Midwestern states, from West Virginia all the way out to Nebraska and the Dakotas. In the state of Georgia, which is the one southern state still rocking back and forth, we finally have a decision on Georgia, and there Barry Goldwater has become the first Republican nominee, presidential nominee, to carry that state in its history. 488,873 to President Johnson's 416,796. Vote profile analysis shows that 52%, 48%. We can take a quick look at the Southern Recap Board. You will see the total vote southwide for these two candidates. President Johnson, 6,375,000. Barry Goldwater, 5,852,000. That breaks out Goldwater pulling in about 47.9% of the popular vote. This means that Senator Goldwater has carried 5 out of the 13 southern states for 47 of its 145 electoral votes. The Goldwater strategy always was to begin with a solid base of about a dozen southern states and work from there, but that base never got beyond 5 states: Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. A quick check of those 5 states this evening indicates that the difference between the election 4 years ago and the one tonight is one of shifting of voting patterns. To look at those 5 states 4 years ago, you will notice that the pockets of Republican strength centered around the cities: Birmingham, Atlanta, New Orleans, Jackson, Mississippi, Columbia, South Carolina. But tonight, the centers of Republican strength have left the cities and have moved into the rural, agricultural, deep South, formerly heavy Democratic areas. And there's no question that the reason for the senator's strength in those 5 states, those deep South states, was 1, his vote on the Civil Rights Bill, 2, his constant emphasis on law and order. He promised a return to peace and tranquility in the streets to protect the women of this nation from street demonstrations, and his constant elevation of states' rights as a general way of life if he were elected to the White House. One other thing we might mention is that in Louisiana, for instance, only 1 white Protestant in 4 was for Lyndon Johnson. In some places in Mississippi, the majorities against Johnson ran as high as 9-1. Around Meridian in Mississippi, Lyndon Johnson barely got 5%. In fact, Mississippi could be considered the only state in the whole country where there was a landslide against Lyndon Johnson. Harry?
Roger, there seem to be a couple of questions coming out of the southern results tonight, and they both had to do with moderates. Where does this leave the Republican moderates in the Deep South? You remember Meade Alcorn, the former National Republican chairman who acted as a consultant to CBS, recalling the beginning of Operation Dixie in the Eisenhower years. And they poured a great deal of money into developing and hoping to get the benefit of the Negro vote in the South. Now that's all shot, isn't it? It's all gone.
Harry, one of the most lively, interesting Republican organizations that I ever watched was in Mecklenburg County around Charlotte, North Carolina. Mr. Alcorn knows about that organization. And back in '52, when the Republicans got a foothold here and a congressional seat there, their popularity was based not on the race issue, but on a general economic conservative philosophy. It was a reaction against big government and against what this rising young managerial class considered to be federal intervention with states' rights. Men like Robert Forsyth in Georgia. Last year, the Negroes were literally read out of the Republican Party in Georgia. This leaves these moderates in a very awkward position, and I dare say some of them probably will return to the Democratic Party.
Roger, I'm going to interrupt my own questioning of you for a moment. I've got a dispatch here somewhat wet from the Pacific Ocean. We feel that Hawaii is going to go for Lyndon Johnson. There are only 7% of the vote tabulated there, and 11,000 for President Johnson, and 3,000 for Senator Goldwater. This is not, incidentally, a VPA call. This is people we know in Hawaii, who know the place and know where these votes are from and what is happening, and they say that it's going to go for President Johnson. He's very big with the hula set, too, as well as every other set.
And the pineapple users.
Getting back to the South for 1 minute, unless we've been told to wind it up.
No, we haven't.
The Republican moderates have got a problem. What about the Democratic moderates, people like Carl Sanders in Georgia, who more or less went along with the administration, who, while they certainly didn't endorse the civil rights bill, sort of went along with it, sort of said this is the coming thing. Has this hurt them badly, do you think?
Well, if you take the congressional delegation, they can see the handwriting on the wall now. That there had been some hope among Southern moderates in Washington that a moderate point of view might carry some weight in the South. But obviously, this is not the case. That where race is the big issue, you've got to be on the side of those who feel that the Negro has gone too far, that moderation on the race issue will not work, and as an ingredient of successful political life. And if you take a list of the states that Goldwater carried tonight and compare it with Nixon's list and Eisenhower's list, it's an interesting comparison. Nixon, 4 years ago, took Florida, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Virginia. Those are border and upper South states. Goldwater took Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Dwight Eisenhower's great sweep through the South in 1956 never penetrated more deeply than Louisiana. He took Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. So there's no question, Walter, that tonight's gains by the senator in the southern part of the state, I think we must say, were based mainly on the racial issue.
One of our southern senators, or southwestern lightweight, Ralph Yarborough in Texas, who won down there, has made one of the probably more gracious victory statements in referring to George Bush, who came from Connecticut originally and was expected to run even a closer race against Yarborough in Texas than he did. Yarborough in his victory statement said, "I think my opponent ought to pack up his baggage and go back where he came from," leaving no doubt about his feelings about his recent opponent in Texas. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where now 77% of the popular vote has been tabulated, and Lyndon Johnson has almost a 13 million vote lead, 62% to 38%. For Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey over at Goldwater and Miller. And John Bailey, the Democratic National Committee chairman, is predicting that the Johnson margin will go to 15 million, which will certainly be a new record. The percentage already indicates that there is one. Our complete VPA model in Pennsylvania now, that's all of our vote profile analysis counties and precincts by which we make our judgments, indicates a final percentage of 50.3% for Senator Scott over Mrs. Genevieve Blatt's total there. The tabulated vote is now running at about 50.4%, with 87% of the vote tabulated. 2,024,000 votes for Senator Scott, 1,989,000 votes for Miss Genevieve Blatt. This, of course, is in the range of possible error, and we are continuing to put Pennsylvania in the too close to call category. In the same category is California, with almost a half the vote counted now, and Pierre Salinger pulling up just a little bit. The margin there is less than 200,000 votes, as you see. Salinger, 1,530,000. George Murphy, 1,705,000. That's still far too close for our VPA estimate to call. We might take a look, Bob Trout, if we may, if you don't mind, at Ohio there, too, which was another one of those very close senatorial races.
Yes, let's look at Ohio. Robert Taft, Jr., the Republican, at the last time we took a look at the numbers, was narrowly ahead of Senator Stephen Young, and he still is. Mr. Taft was expected to run even stronger, as a matter of fact, and if it hadn't been for President Johnson's great victory in Ohio, he doubtless would have come out much farther ahead than he seems to be coming out now, although the vote profile analysis still shows that it's too close to make an estimate of a final victor.
Well, I was just looking at something, too, as you were giving us those figures in New York, where Robert Kennedy has won. Senator Kenneth Keating, and some more late returns, is even closing that margin a little bit. It's now just barely 500,000 votes, and it was almost 600,000 at one time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And Henry Paolucci, you see the fellow down there at the bottom of that board, the Conservative Party candidate, said during the campaign that it would be a miracle if he got 100,000 votes in his campaign to help defeat Senator Keating. He's got considerably more than 100,000. Also, you recall Governor Rockefeller said a little while ago that Senator Keating was running $1.5 million ahead of the rest of the Republican ticket in New York State, and he said that's a record for New York. Pointed that out.
We might make a note that in the presidential race, there are only 2 states left undecided, as far as we're concerned here at CBS, and that is Alaska, which will not be heard from perhaps until much later in the morning, and Arizona, where the race is still too close to call in Senator Goldwater's home precincts. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. There are several things remarkable about this race tonight. The remarkable scope of President Johnson's victory, cutting across all economic, political, and racial groups, geographical groups as it has. The remarkable speed of our network election service, which has tabulated so many millions of votes faster than they've ever been tabulated before. The remarkable accuracy of the polls. Our Lewis Harris, for instance, who predicted almost on target what Lyndon Johnson's majority would be. It's now running 62%. And one of the remarkable things that just developed a little while ago, the long delay Senator Barry Goldwater has imposed in making a concession. He says it will not be until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and it might be recalled that in earlier years, of course this is his prerogative, but it is true that in earlier years when the races were far closer, and even when they were almost as wide as this one, the concessions have come far earlier. In the remarkable race in 1948, Governor Dewey in New York was arranged to concede by around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, as I recall it. And last year, in that very close race between Vice President Nixon and then Senator Kennedy, Mr. Nixon conceded by around 9 or 10 in the morning. But it's going to be 10 o'clock before Senator Goldwater concedes, according to an announcement now from his press secretary at Phoenix, Arizona. He is at his home in Phoenix, secluded there, and does not expect to say anything until that hour. Now, Mike Wallace, perhaps you can tell us some of the details on the gubernatorial race.
There are a couple of very tight gubernatorial contests still going on. First of all, in Massachusetts, Walter, Democrat Francis Bellotti is leading 323,000 to 281,000 over former Governor John Volpe, with 33% of the popular vote tabulated. And as you can see, VPA calls that one still too close to call. The reason that Massachusetts takes such a long time to count their ballots is the fact that each Massachusetts voter has to cast a separate vote. They have what they call the Massachusetts-type ballot, which necessitates a separate vote for each candidate, and it simply takes a long time. So it's Bellotti and Volpe still too close to call, in spite of the fact that President Johnson is sweeping Massachusetts with a staggering 77% share of that vote. In the state of Wisconsin, a very tight contest also. President Johnson swept through to a tremendous victory over Barry Goldwater there, 63% to 37. But as you can see here, Warren Knowles, the Republican, leading the incumbent Governor John Reynolds 448 to 393 with 57% of that popular vote counted. But BPA still calls it too close to call. Incidentally, in Wisconsin, the issue is, I talked to Warren Knowles just this afternoon. He said the issue there is a vote against John Reynolds. He calls him High Tax Jack. John Reynolds last time around campaigned said he was not going to have a sales tax in the state of Wisconsin. One was put up to him. He vetoed it. A selective sales tax was put up to him. And then the state was beginning to run out of money, and so he had to sign the sales tax into law, and it's hurting him out in Wisconsin tonight. Now, around the country, there are many interesting referenda today. Oregon, the state of Oregon, has become the 10th state in the union to abolish capital punishment. With half the ballots counted now, it's a conclusive 139,000 for ending the death penalty to 91,000 against. And this despite reports in today's Oregon papers of a girl raped and murdered last night near Springfield, Oregon. Very interesting referendum down in Maryland. Maryland voters have approved a state law banning discrimination in hotels and restaurants throughout the state. Now, that old law there did not cover Maryland's Eastern Shore, where lies the racially torn town of Cambridge, Maryland. This referendum was the country's first large public vote on civil rights, and in a state with one foot in the South, the vote is about 303,000 in favor of a public accommodations law to 275,000 against, and 99% of the votes are counted. Just one last quick one, Walter. Out in California, they are voting to block pay TV or not. Well, 164,000 Californians want to block pay television. 73,000 want to permit pay television. 3% of the vote is counted.
I've always thought we were pretty good. Don't see any objection to us at all. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. With 78% of the vote counted now, 54 million votes have been counted, 33,500,000 of them for Lyndon Johnson and 20,800,000 for Senator Goldwater. Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General, who has won a race for the Senate in New York against the incumbent Republican Senator Kenneth Keating, is coming into his headquarters at the Statler Hilton Hotel in New York. You see him there, the smiling candidate who will now go to the New York Senate, or to the United States Senate from New York, to join his brother, Edward Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, who also won his race in Massachusetts tonight. The first time in our history, two brothers serving in the United States Senate at the same time. A family that has given 3 senators to the nation. One, of course, the late President John Kennedy. Robert Kennedy overcame charges of carpetbagging coming into New York State, since his recent residence had not been here. Chuck Von Fremd is down there at the Kennedy headquarters. Chuck, come in.
Yes, sir, and the new junior senator, or senator-elect. Hello, Michael, how are you? Bob, good to see you. The new senator-elect from New York State is just making his appearance here at the Statler Hilton, which is the headquarters for the Democratic State National Committee. It's been a long evening, but these 2,000 very enthusiastic supporters have been standing here shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow for the last 4 or 5 hours, and now they finally have their moment. They've got the man they were rooting for, the new senator from New York City. Standing off to Mr. Kennedy's right, to your left, is former Governor Averell Harriman of New York, another leading Democrat who has campaigned very strongly for the senator-elect, Senator Kennedy.
Mrs. Kennedy, Ethel Kennedy, the mother of 8 children, who is expecting her 9th,
Ladies
is
and
also
gentlemen.
looking very happy. And here is Mayor Bob Wagner.
Our next United States Senator, and going to be a great and wonderful fighting Senator, Bob Kennedy.
Thank you. Mayor Wagner, Governor Harriman, I've sent the following telegram to Senator Kenneth Keating. My appreciation for your telegram of good wishes and your gracious and generous offer of assistance. As we both know, there is unfinished business in this state and in our country. And the utilization of your talents will be essential to achieve the goals of all of us. Signed, Robert F. Kennedy. I want to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to all those throughout the state of New York who supported my candidacy. I want to express my appreciation and gratitude of my wife and my family for the many kindnesses that were shown to us during the period of the last 8 weeks of this campaign. These are days that we will never forget, and we're most appreciative. I also want to take this opportunity to express my particular appreciation to a number of individuals out of a large group who were particularly helpful. First, to Governor Harriman, who was I owe a great debt of gratitude to Governor Harriman and to Mrs. Harriman. But I think that really this is a debt that is owed by all of us as American citizens, because I don't think that anybody has made a greater contribution to public life over the period of the last 3 decades than Governor Abel Harriman. Without any question, if it hadn't been for his determination and his courage and his judgment, we would never have had a test ban treaty. So we all owe a debt of gratitude to him for that. And I also want to express my appreciation to Mayor Wagner, who during the course of this campaign, from the very beginning, has been an advisor and a counselor to me, and during the course of the campaign, in the most difficult moments, stood by my side and was a real friend. And I want to express my appreciation to him for all that he's done for me and the very important role that he played in the election result tonight. I also want to thank Billy McCune, and the state chairman, and all of the effort that he made, the organizational effort that he put into this campaign, and express my appreciation to him. And also to Mayor John Burns of Binghamton, New York, who was a co-chairman of our campaign and really made such a major difference for all of us, and once again stood by and was a real friend. And I want to also thank Peter Strauss, who I hope is here. Who organized all of our campaigns, and thank his wife Ellen for all that she did. And I also, if you'll bear with me one more moment, I'd like to thank a relative